Good morning, everyone, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. My name's Brett Bonser. I'm a director here at Align.me, and I'm joined by my colleague, Annika Dobby. Annika, say hello to the audience.
Good morning, guys. Hope you're all well. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, delighted to be presenting again on Bright Talk, and the topic for today's discussion is how to align your indirect sales channel with your go-to-market strategy. And this technology obviously gives us the ability to share content throughout the world. I'm coming to you from Melbourne, Australia. It's coming up to 8 o'clock here in the morning in Melbourne. A slightly grey day, unfortunately, and a bit of rain. Hopefully, wherever you are in the world, that it's a sunny, bright start to the day. Let me start first of all with one of my favourite cartoons that somewhat sets the scene for today's discussion. And it shows marketing guys throwing leads into a canyon, hoping that someday these leads will be plentiful enough to bridge the gap between both marketing and sales. And while the slide Crossing the Chasm focuses on the disconnect between marketing and sales, that could equally be seen to be true not only between direct sales but indirect sales. How do you bridge that misalignment gap, obviously, but sometimes between vendors and indirect channels, and of course between marketing and sales? And this area of alignment of an organisation between their marketing functions, between your sales functions, be it direct or indirect, has been an area of focus for Align.me over the last 14 years. Indeed, in 2005, in conjunction with Eloqua, we published the first piece of comprehensive research on the topic of alignment from a study of 1,400 global businesses around the world. And that initial research provided us with some really startling results. It showed that those aligned businesses, the companies that had really nailed this, were achieving growth rates of 5.4 percentage points faster than their non-aligned competitors. They were closing at 38% better from proposed to close, and they were retaining customers 36% more effectively. So really startling results. Roll on some 10 years, obviously lots of change, and back in 2014-15 we decided to redo that alignment research, this time in conjunction with the global marketing automation player Marketo. And again, we went to a global audience, this time of over 500 participants around the world. Of these, they were all in the complex buying and selling environment. So we filtered out any of those that were in more transactional sales. So very relevant to all of us that are on the call this morning. And again, unsurprisingly, the aligned businesses were doing substantially better than their non-aligned competitors. Their proposed to close rates were significantly better, indeed 67% better from proposed to close. There was a lot less friction between the various functions, and for those of you that are on the call that kind of lead marketing, either direct marketing or even indirect channel marketing, the marketing teams in aligned businesses, be it either direct sales or indirect sales and marketing, there was 209% more revenue being accounted for by marketing generated leads. So clearly, getting aligned between your various functions as either a vendor and your indirect channel to market, or indeed marketing and direct sales, is an important point if you want to accelerate the growth of your business. In terms of today's agenda, I'm going to cover 5 key things, and then I'm going to leave you with hopefully an opportunity to take some action in invest in an opportunity to drive real growth within your business. I'm going to cover the common causes of indirect channel misalignment. And to do that, I'm going to draw upon, I guess, our experience over the last 14 years and over 500 client engagements. And then I'm going to share insights in terms of how you might optimize your own indirect strategy. And then move on to sharing with you some insights in terms of what happens when you get it right, some Q&A along the way, your steps to alignment, and then again in the final section, the keys to growth and a very tailored opportunity. Now, along the way, if you want to sing out and ask some questions, my colleague Annika is monitoring the chat room, so please do that. As I said, there'll be an opportunity for questions at the end of the session. Now, my personal experience dates back over 30 years in terms of working in frontline sales, frontline marketing, and also as a managing director of the subsidiary of a NASDAQ-listed company. And these are just some of the clients that we at AlignMe have actually served. Our organisation is focused on bringing marketing, sales, be it direct and indirect, together around a really blisteringly clear plan for growth. And we've had the opportunity to serve some of the world's best-known brands, but also within the local market, we're working with a number of high-growth small enterprises where we're actually extending our work not only into planning but execution. And one of the things that all of these businesses had in common is that they were looking to kind of bridge the misalignment gap, the ability to actually bring their functions together around a clear plan. I'm going to draw upon later specifically three of these. One of those is VTEL Corporation. Some of you, if you've been in the video conferencing industry, will know VTEL. At one point in time, they were the second largest manufacturer of conferencing technology worldwide. And I'll tell you the story of VTEL and how we aligned our indirect strategy for growth, but also what happened next. Request DSL is a more local story. They're a broadband carrier for which I had the privilege to be head of sales and strategy, and I'll talk about that. And then finally, I want to share with you some of the insights from our work with SAP around the world. SAP, I'm sure many of you will know, the world's second largest software vendor, and we've had the privilege to serve SAP on a global basis, driving or helping them to drive their indirect channel strategy with some powerful facilitated programs and training. Now let me move first to the common causes of misalignment. And there are three big things that I want to touch upon in today's discussion. I'm going to talk about this notion of the product's so fantastic, it's just going to fly off the shelves. The next one is the all too common problem of the quota margin dilemma. And then finally, I want to talk about having a foot in both camps. So, Annika, I love this slide of pigs flying in the background. You know, all too often we're working with companies and they come to us and say, you know, we've built this fantastic product or service. It's just awesome. It's going to take the market by storm. All we need is an indirect channel to market. We'll give them the product, and you know they're just going to fly off the shelves. And the reality is that we know that products and services still need to be sold in the market until they become known and adopted, almost in mature markets. Having an indirect channel strategy that assumes that your indirect channel is just going to know how to get up and sell your new product to market without your direct support is a recipe for disaster. If you don't know how to sell your product, then don't expect an indirect channel to do that for you, and don't be surprised where that approach actually fails to deliver dividends. The next one that we see is this quota margin dilemma. And again, Annika, I love this one. What's this slide? Where's this slide come from?
Please, sir, can I have some more?
Please, sir, can I have some more? So that lovely slide here of the young boy with his bowl outstretched, saying, "Can I actually have a little bit more?" And that's the dilemma. So we have our direct sales organisation, all too often, who are leading the charge, who have control of the market, and the indirect channel is left to feed on the scraps. Sitting out there, engaging with your product marketing teams, competing almost direct head-to-head with your direct sales organisations, almost begging, pleading for a few leads to go and help you to go prosecute in the market. And unsurprisingly, organisations where they're failing to properly engage and support and even create demand effectively for their indirect channel, don't be surprised when these organisations see that their indirect channel strategy fails to get traction. And then the final one is having a foot in both camps. It's this challenge or this potential disconnect between organisations when they have almost a hybrid channel model. So they have a part of their organisation that's basically going out and leveraging direct selling to go address the market, and another part that is being executed through their indirect channels to market, be them distributors, value-added resellers, or integration partners or the like. And there's this constant conflict between the direct sales organisation and the indirect sales organisation, and the leadership over the top going, "Hey, we're going to go hedge our bets. We're going to have a foot in both camps," and failing to fully commit to either part of the organisation. Now, I'll talk a little bit more about this later, but certainly when I was heading up sales, indirect sales and strategy with Request DSL, one of Australia's fastest growing broadband carriers, we were always being challenged by our board of directors to actually go and implement a direct strategy. And I fought that tooth and nail along the way because I wanted to make sure that we focused our energies and really enabled the indirect channel. As soon as you start hedging your bets, you're having to manage that conflict between the direct sales organisation and indirect, and perhaps failing to actually get the true value out of each. It really is it's a challenge to actually drive both. So there's three of the really, really big challenges that we see. It's a good opportunity to perhaps go to the audience and see if there are any questions or any other insights in terms of some of the indirect channel challenges that you're seeing. What are the other things that we're seeing there in terms of the disconnect that exists between direct and the common causes of misalignment? So I'm seeing a question come through here. This is a good one. So that there's a challenge around the marketing investment. So too much of the marketing is being directed to direct and not enough to indirect. And that's something that we actually see quite often as well. How do you actually split your marketing investment between both direct and indirect and actually drive effectiveness? Another one is that we're seeing is that there's lack of clarity around the market segments that you're going after. So there's no clear delineation between the two. That's a great question coming, I think, from one of our colleagues in the US. And again, later on, what I'm going to do to the gentleman that asked that question, I'm going to talk a little bit about how you direct your strategy and make sure that it serves both parts of your audience. So let's move on to that now. How do you optimize your indirect strategy? So I want to talk about three things here. One is, first of all, understanding your buyer's journey. Understanding the journey that your buyers take to move through problem, need, ultimately to seek a solution. And at the core of that, the big problem that you're in the business of solving. Making your strategy, we use the term buyer-centric. I want to talk about market maturity as a input to channel strategy and understanding the maturity of your buyers, because that is a critical piece in terms of direct versus indirect channel strategy. And then finally, understanding the math of your own funnel. What sort of sales resource is required for you to fully prosecute the market opportunity that exists, and actually how do you dimension that effectively, given the available data that either presents from your CRM, your marketing automation system, or indeed your innate knowledge that gets built up within the marketing and sales teams of any organisation. Let's first talk about understanding your buyer's journey to focus your strategy in the context of indirect. Now, the notion of the term the buyer's journey was first coined by my business partner, Hugh McFarlane. And some of you on the call may have read Hugh's book, The Leaky Funnel, but he coined that term over 15 years ago when he actually first published the novel. And the novel itself, it documented the journey of fictional company Hardbits Corporation as they attempted to make their strategy buyer-centric. And you see that term, the buyer's journey, quite often now in a lot of published literature, certainly those tracking the marketing automation vendors and other organisations like Serious Decisions. You see that term. It actually came from Hugh, my partner, and over 15 years ago. So what is the buyer's journey? We as a seller, we're going through a selling journey. We're trying to obviously identify leads, turn those into qualified leads, to go then engage with our customers, hopefully put a relevant proposal on the table, become the preferred provider, and ultimately engage. And if you look at CRM systems around the world, or even sales training methodologies, the notion of universe, above the funnel, in the funnel, best view and close, they are common selling terms. But our buyers are completely uninterested in our selling journey. All they're interested in is their buying journey. So what is it? At some point in time, your buyers, they're untroubled and unaware. They don't know who you are, and even if they do, they don't have a problem that you're in the business of solving. And then perhaps something happens. Now, maybe it's something that you did, or maybe it's something that they saw, but for whatever reason, they're no longer untroubled. They have a gap, something that they're trying to fix, accomplish, or avoid. I've heard this described as the cognitive phase of the decision-making process. It's a gap. They're getting clarity around some big issue that exists, either lack of something that's broken or more of a good thing that warrants them really investing time to go after it. So they're troubled. Having become troubled, they're then in a position to move from that to actually move to the next stage of their buying journey. What do I need to make that pain go away? It's been described almost as the divergent thinking phase of the decision-making process. Now, in this next stage of need agreement, they're looking at all the requirements to actually close their gap. Having got clarity around that, they're then in a position to receive offers, make a preference decision, and then ultimately engage and hopefully close out. And that is the journey that each one of the buyers go through. But there is a critical phase in this, and it's that early phase, it's that problem definition. Because all of us and your buyers are the same. We have many competing needs, but it's only those needs prioritised by compelling business problems that we take action against. So a strategy, a good strategy, be it either direct or indirect, is buyer-centric. It's actually informed by the big problem that you're in the business of solving. So understand your buyer's journey. What are the big problems that your business is in the business of solving? Think about it. Think about the clients that you've served in the past. What are the big problems that they have that you solve? What about your current customers? What are the big issues that they have that you solve? What about your products or services? Work back from your products and services. If that's the product or service, before that is the need, and before that is the problem. And then even think about your current channel to market, be it either direct or indirect. Think about the problems that they're being engaged about. And hopefully you'll end up with a big, big list of problems that you're in the business of solving, and you can actually prioritise that down to a target list. Now, when we work with clients through either one of our planning programs, and we have one product called Funnel Camp, where we take individual clients through a very structured journey to create alignment and build their plan for growth, or in the case of indirect channel-focused businesses, where we do that at scale. It's a program called Funnel Mastery, where we have multiple partners in the room, and we're following that same planning journey. At the core of that is understanding the big problem that you're in the business of solving, because ultimately that should guide your strategy. What is the relative attractiveness of each one of those problems? What is the relative strength that you have in terms of solving one of those problems? And then hopefully you can identify a critical problem, a problem for which you'll be most richly rewarded, but also where you have greatest relative strength. And that can really be the focal point or the rallying point for your overall strategy. Armed by that knowledge, that key problem that you're in the business of solving, then you can start to ask yourself some critical questions and make your strategy buyer-centric. You can ask yourself, who most has that problem? What are the types of organisations? What are the segments? What are the sub-segments? What are the roles within those businesses? Because ultimately, that's who you should be selling to. You can ask yourself, what does a complete solution look like to that problem? Because that's what you should be selling. Or at least you should understand what complete looks like. And now let's tie it back to the core topic of today's discussion, which is your indirect strategy. Now, you cannot have a discussion around channel to market without actually having real clarity around what that core problem is that you're trying to solve. Because ultimately, your buyers will determine or have a big impact on the effectiveness of your channel strategy to market. So think about it. Think about your buyers. Who do they expect to engage to? What sort of organisations? What sort of breadth of offering needs to be put on the table to offer a complete solution? Are they expect to engage directly with you as the manufacturer, or are they actually looking for a bundle of solutions that is best served by an indirect channel to market, where the indirect channel is taking some of their capability and your core product and offering it up to the customer? So it's really about making your indirect strategy or even your direct channel strategy buyer-centric. Because one of the ways that you get to go optimise your strategy is to really understand that core problem and have that inform the mix of direct or indirect. But that's only one of the elements. I want to move now to the market maturity model. Evolve your indirect strategy informed by the maturity of your buyers or the maturity of your market. Now, this is not our intellectual property. It comes from the work of Geoffrey Moore. I'm sure many of you will have read Geoffrey Moore's work or perhaps downloaded some of the white papers from Chasm Group and indeed reprints of that from many different providers around the world. And we're at Alignment, we're great fans of Geoffrey Moore's work. He's a real thought leader in terms of strategy. And in his first book, Crossing the Chasm, he talked about the maturity of buyers, how different sort of categories of buyers evolve as a market mature. In the early stage, markets tend to be dominated by visionary buyers, early adopters. And for those of you that have ever sold into those early markets, it's an exciting time. Price is almost irrelevant in that early market. It's actually dominated by buyers who want to be first to market, and they're driven by this need to execute competitive advantage. So in that early market, the challenge is that those buyers are distributed across, multiple segments. So the notion of a highly targeted strategy in terms of a highly targeted segmentation strategy is not really relevant because those early market buyers are distributed across the universe. Large companies, small companies, government, non-government. There's nothing that really binds those organisations together other than they want to be first to market. As the market matures and we enter the realm of pragmatic adoption, these next group of buyers take a very, very different view. They're still very early and innovative in their thinking, but they're also far more pragmatic. And at that next stage of adoption, these buyers are saying, show me someone just like me who's got a return on investment, and then I'm in. And Moore described this as the bowling alley. So you're starting to see pins of adoption, small pins, little sub-segments of adoption where they're saying, show me someone just like me, and they mean exactly. No, I'm a higher education provider, but I'm on the west coast of the United States, and I only deal offering education around technology and finance. So show me one of those companies that's got a return on an investment, and then I'm in. And the strategy there has to be about actually dominating each one of these niches and then moving to the next pin and then beyond. And over time, then Moore described what happened next. He talks about a tornado of adoption. All of a sudden, as more and more pragmatists come together, the market takes off. It ends up almost in a tornado, a feeding frenzy of activity before we hit Main Street of maturity, and then ultimately end of life, where it's starting to get very, very highly competitive and price-driven. And that is the maturity of buyers. And you've seen this in all sorts of technologies around the world. Think about the adoption of mobile phones. Think about the adoption of CRM systems, either on-premise or in the cloud. Think about the adoption of things like PCs. And all of these have actually followed the market maturity curve. Now, you might ask, Annika, what are the implications for this in terms of channel strategy or indeed indirect channel strategy? And the answer is there are very strong implications. Think about it, folks. In the early market, in that early adopter market, your buyers, they want to work with you. They want to be first. They almost want to mould the solution. So in that very, very early market, they are looking to engage directly with you as the vendor. So in that early market, an indirect channel strategy, so going through resellers or distributors, really fails to get traction because your buyers want to engage with you directly. They want to engage with the inventors. And this is a real challenge, particularly to start-up businesses around the world. As they look to expand internationally, they're challenged because they don't see the growth in these international markets because the buyers are looking directly to engage with the vendors. Now, as the market then enters the bowling alley, so this notion of small niches of adoption, indirect channel strategy absolutely comes to play here. The market is saying, show me someone just like me who's got a return on investment, and then I'm in. And those buyers, they want to engage with someone who can deliver a ROI specifically to their niche, who really understands their business. So if you think about your own indirect channel strategy, in this stage of market maturity, you need to find those channel partners, those resellers that have absolute domain knowledge within the niche. As the market matures further and we enter the tornado, what happens is in this period of hyper growth, all of a sudden the market's saying, listen, we don't care about the product or service as long as we can get access to it. And that's really where you start to see the growth of indirect channels, where broad distribution really, really makes sense. You want to give your buyers the maximum opportunity to engage with you. And so you see the explosion, or you should see the explosion of indirect channels during that phase. So for those of you that are currently in the bowling alley, you need to be thinking about that and planning in advance, and how do you actually rapidly expand your indirect channel. And I'll talk about that later on with real-life experience in one of my own case studies a little bit further on. Now, it all starts to get interesting when we hit Main Street and then later on as we move to end of life. And I talked earlier about this foot in both camps. Certainly as we start to hit Main Street, what's starting to happen is that your buyers are actually becoming far more aggressive in terms of how they want to buy and at what price point. And that's where you see a real challenge between direct sales and indirect sales as the margins start to fall out of the products and services. So as you start to move through the tornado, you need to be thinking about how you're going to manage that pricing conflict, which will come as you enter Main Street and then beyond into end of life. In end of life, there is still a role for an indirect channel to market as you're looking to drive almost end-of-life kickers to the products and services. So maybe there are some indirect channels that can add a little bit of additional value there to give you that end-of-life kick along the way. So again, channel strategy is really, really key in terms of your direct and indirect channel to market. Finally, let's talk about dimensioning your funnel. With knowledge of market maturity, you can almost start to segment it out based on where your buyers are, the sort of channel that you need, direct or indirect, or perhaps a hybrid or a blend informed by the market of both. But it still hasn't answered the question, how many? So how many do we need to fully prosecute the market opportunity that exists in front of us and achieve the revenue objectives that we've been set? And how do we go about doing that? Well, unsurprisingly at Align.Me, we recommend you do that through the eyes of your buyers and the buying journey that they take. Dimension, first of all, think about what is your sales resource today, and how many meetings can that sales force sustain? And again, by meeting I mean either a face-to-face meeting or a web conference or a Skype meeting. It's a meeting in our world is something that you plan for. And again, having done hundreds of these projects around the world. Kind of rule of thumb for sales organisations, it's somewhere between 2 to 3 and anywhere up to about 20 meetings a week at the extreme. But more often than not, it breaks down in complex selling environments to 4 to 5 meetings per week per sales resource. Now, clearly for those that are dominated by direct sales organisations, you should have, or you likely will have, the greatest amount of mind share with your direct sales channel. Although, even within direct selling organisations, sometimes you have competing product categories, and you as product managers are competing for direct sales mind share. But as we know, working with indirect channels, quite often you're actually taking a portion of their time. So you might have a full-time sales person, but in the indirect channel, only one of their available meetings is being focused on your product. So you need to kind of do that dimensioning activity up front to get a sense of what's available right now. Then we need to understand our buyers. So if that's what we have, what do we need? Do we actually have enough resource? So one of the ways that we get to do that is to dimension our funnel. Now, as we know, and Hugh coined this effectively in his book, The Leaky Funnel, even though we talk about it as being a sales funnel, we know that that's not the case. A funnel, everything that you pour in the top comes out the bottom. But in sales and marketing, be it either direct sales or channel sales, that's never the case. It should have been called the sales sieve, but that never would have caught on. We're going to get leakage for a number of different reasons along the buying journey. Along the way, buyers, you're going to fail to position. They're not going to be interested enough. The gaps might not be compelling. The needs might not become fully formed. The proposal may not get through your own internal quality assurance process. Well, there might be something about available resource or terms and conditions that causes you or the client to leak at that point. You may not become the preferred, and then ultimately you may even leak out at the contract stage. You might fail to come to an agreement. But there is going to be leakage at every point in every funnel, and this is true whether you're selling direct or indirect. Armed with that knowledge, ask yourself a couple of questions. Think about how long it's taking on average through each one of those stages. And again, I know you look at these numbers and averages are a challenge, and these numbers will be wrong, no doubt about that. We've done this hundreds of times. They're always wrong. The point is try and get them as directionally correct. This is about a guide to dimensioning your channels. Think about your leakage rate. So what's your success rate that you're achieving at each one of these stages? In the example we've given, we've got 10% progression at positioning, 60% are confirming their interest, and 40% are leaking. We've got a large number that are acknowledging their gap, and only 12% that are leaking at that stage, and so on and so on. I encourage you to think about leakage per stage as really one of your inputs to your dimensioning. And then finally, the number of meetings. Now, on average, how many meetings is it taking to progress an average customer through that stage of the journey? And again, folks, the numbers will be imprecise, but a directional number is still highly insightful. So what you can do is you can actually take each one of these inputs and use our advanced funnel modelling tool, Funnel Plan, and actually dimension out the sort of sales resource that's required. So Funnel Plan, and again, later on I'm going to give you some links to the software, will actually give you some insights in terms of how many buyers you need at each stage of your buying journey, but also how many salespeople you need to go prosecute your funnel to achieve your revenue objectives. And that is really the final input in terms of making that decision between direct and indirect channel strategy in terms of your overall resourcing to go prosecute the market. So what happens when you get it right? And I'm going to cover this pretty quickly, and I'm going to draw upon, first of all, 3 case studies. Now, the first of these comes from VTEL Corporation, the second of Request DSL, and then the third around SAP. But as I said earlier, we also had research that we looked at as an organisation that showed what happened when there was alignment between all of the functions within the business. And I want to share with you some of those highlights first. So that second research study, and again, that's going to be available to everyone on the call after our presentation. We looked at 500 companies around the globe, and particularly what was happening in terms of the alignment of businesses on a global basis. And we know that when businesses got it right, that there was a massive jump when there was a shared process between the organisations, when product marketing, channel marketing, sales, be it direct and indirect, were all working to the same aligned process. Alignment meant that marketing qualified lead or lead acceptance rates went through the roof. So when there is an alignment around this kind of clear plan, MQL acceptance by sales jumps enormously. 108% improvement of a marketing qualified lead by sales. And for those of you that are actually tracking any of the industry research, we all know that lead acceptance, under normal circumstances in terms of from marketing to sales, is normally less than 25%. So we saw a big jump. We also, unsurprisingly, saw a big jump in marketing's contribution to revenue. So for my marketing leaders that are on the call today, one of the things around how you improve, or one of the drivers to improvement, is some shared and aligned process between the functions. There was one other thing that happened when there was a shared process. When there was alignment between the organisations, we saw a 51% jump in customer retention. So alignment between the organisation, a shared process, be it marketing, sales, or between vendor and channel to market, we saw big jumps in terms of improvement across the board. Lead acceptance, marketing's contribution to revenue, customer retention, and again from our earlier study, big improvements in proposed to close, anywhere up to 69% improvement. That's also supported by my work in a number of different organisations. VTEL Corporation was one of those. It was an organisation that I had the privilege of leading some 20 years ago. And for those of you that know the video conferencing industry, you might actually know VTEL Corporation. You may even, for those of you that ever saw the Mars buggy landing on Mars and projecting back the shots from that first Mars buggy, the algorithms were created by VTEL Corporation. Now, if you haven't heard of VTEL, don't be too worried either, because they almost ceased to exist. They were a great example of a company that was able to ride that early market, the bowling alley. So worldwide, we were dominant players in both telemedicine and distance education. And certainly in Australia over a 5-year period, that strategy enabled us to go from 4% market share to 22% market share over the 5 years that I led the business. The challenge is that in a market that entered tornado, you needed broad distribution. And many of you are probably sitting on perhaps a Polycom phone. We are doing so here within Australia right now. Polycom entered the market at that bowling alley phase, and they entered with not only a great product, but a broad distribution strategy. So they went from being almost non-existent overnight to the dominant player, and it was really about understanding the market's need for indirect channel. Later on, I had the great privilege to lead a company called Request DSL. And they were one of the first broadband carriers in Australia. And I guess partly from the scars of watching VTEL fail to prosecute the tornado, we never made that mistake this time around. A Request meant from being a non-existing vendor, when I joined, we were at 500,000 in revenue, to turning over 22 million annualised revenue in 18 months. Now, how did we do that? Absolutely, it was about having a great product, but it was also about having a broad distribution strategy. We were able to sign 160 reseller partners in the first 18 months. And what underpinned that channel acquisition? We really optimised how you actually acquired channels. Little things. We went from a 20-page contract to a one-page contract, and were able to drive that sort of channel acquisition success, and revenue followed. But it was about aligning the channel strategy to the market. And then finally, let's talk about SAP. SAP is an organisation, one of the largest in the world. Now, historically, they've been very successful in dominating on-premise systems. But as the market's matured, as technology has moved into the cloud, they recognised some years ago that they needed to start driving an indirect channel strategy, almost a hybrid of direct and indirect. And we've been very privileged to work with SAP around optimising that on a global basis. We've driven a program called Funnel Mastery as part of their SAP Marketing Excellence program. And that program has enabled them to work with partners on a global basis to build that aligned plan. That aligned plan that brings their marketing function, their sales function together in a way that's most effective. Some great outcomes there in terms of funnel mastery and in terms of that one-day program. And again, reach out to me. Want to talk to vendors and people around on the call about how we might enable you to affect this within your own workshops. I'm just conscious that we're coming up to the closeout time, so I might skip through to some of the final sections of what we do next. So your steps to alignment. Number one, let's make sure that you plan together. One of the things that we know is around joint planning is highly effective, and there are some great benchmarks that we see in terms of organisations that do. The next one is plan quickly. So one of the other elements that we saw in terms of our global research is that those organisations that not only plan together but plan quickly and often saw some great returns. So really in that 1 to 4 week period, team, don't overbake it, get the team together, do it quickly and do it often. And then finally, on one page. If you're going to get sales, marketing, operations, direct sales, indirect sales, if you want to get everyone on the same page, our recommendation is build a plan on one page. And so at the core of our funnel mastery program, or the output of that, and indeed the output of our software funnel plan and the output of our planning methodology